Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Today on the channel, we are going to be talking about a movie which vastly exceeded my expectations. A movie that I think is going to be one of my favorite, definitely in my top 10, and possibly one of the best psychological preparedness, apocalypse-style movies that I've ever seen. We're also going to talk about why a lot of people in Hollywood, particularly these bigwig, highbrow movie critics out there who know everything about the universe, you would think with a movie like this, what was clearly very fashionably progressive, that they would be standing in line to give it praises, but for some reason they're not. And I have a theory as to why. Stick with me, guys. Let's talk about it. The movie is called Don't Look Up. Just came out on December 10th, so I'm sure there's a lot of people who haven't seen it, so spoiler alert. Now, before we get into breaking down this movie piece by piece, I'm going to forewarn you that this movie is clearly and explicitly stated on the package that it is an allegory for climate change. Now, hold on. I know I got my share of climate skeptics in the crowd. I respect your opinions, and I'm not going to sit here and call you deniers or anything like that, because I know things like that only make people further entrenched in their ideas, and it only makes them want to push back more, and it really gets us nowhere. So I respect your views, you respect mine, you guys know what I represent, we share the common cause of prepping, let's just leave it there. However, how this movie pertains to climate change and the disasters which may follow, to me, is not the main point in the movie, or at least there's an unintentional message or an inadvertent message, which is even greater and more relevant to preparedness. So the plot of this movie is that there's a couple astronomers that detect there's an asteroid that is going to hit the Earth, but everybody and their dog, including the government, the media, and the easily subdued, selfie-taking, self-gratifying masses really want nothing to do with this. They're way too distracted with the 30-second BS clips on TikTok to be concerned with anything that has more depth than a kiddie pool. And they spend this whole movie trying to convince the human race that the shit's gonna hit the fan and that we need to do something about it. That's what I like about this movie. That's what I can relate to. In fact, I think sometimes there's some scout out there in Hollywood who follows my channel, because, you know, just like other scouts, they go out to sporting events and they try to figure out who's going to be the next first round draft pick. I'm pretty sure the same thing happens on YouTube. I've been approached a couple times and I've never been approached again. Probably because they know I can't be bought. And I know some of you are going to say, oh, sure you can. You sell stuff all the time. Correction. I sell stuff that I actually use and that's going to keep you alive. I'm not one of these athletes who is selling Burger King or Coke or Pepsi. Big difference. Anyways, now before I crack open the carton of Easter eggs in this movie, I do want to talk about the critiques which are being thrown at this movie from Hollywood. I don't know what to make of these self-important movie critics, especially the ones at Rotten Tomatoes. It just seems like a lot of these reviews nowadays, they're over-intellectualized. It's as if they're competing for an award themselves in the way that they're written. They tend to be very verbose and overcooked. In a lot of ways, a lot of the critiques of this movie are what the movie itself is criticizing.
The premise is squandered in a slapdash scattershot send-up that turns almost everyone into nincompoops, trivializes everything it touches, oozes with self-delight, and becomes part of the babble and yammer it portrays.
One of the main reasons why they criticize this movie is they say it's a little too in your face, it's a little too on the nose, meaning that they want the metaphor of climate change as the asteroid to be a bit more subtle. It should be so in your face. So they would like to see it more as like, remember the movie Dawn of the Dead in the 1970s, the original one, and to some degree the second one in 2004. Basically, that movie is a metaphor for consumerism. Because if you don't remember, in Dawn of the Dead, the survivors get trapped in a shopping mall, and for the first little while, they're happy because they have everything they ever wanted, okay? When the grid was up and everything was running, they have access to all the material things that they could ever want. However, as time goes on, they become incredibly miserable and unfulfilled, and as such is an allegory for the state of the world right now. They would like it to be a bit more subtle like that. To me, that's a bullshit criticism, because I thought this movie was absolutely fantastic. In spite of Leonardo DiCaprio going a little over the top in his virtue signaling, I thought it was an amazing movie. Now, the reason why they don't like this movie, I think, okay, Here's the reason. In the movie, the person who's the president, which is Meryl Streep, is basically being compared to Trump in some ways. Because in the movie, the president, Meryl Streep, is incredibly flippant about the fact that this asteroid is going to hit the planet and only concerned about her polls, how well she's polling, and could give a shit about whether or not the world is going to end. So they were trying to kind of draw some parallels there with conservatism and the right. However, as you go deeper into the movie, you start to realize that it's not so cut and dry, because there's a lot of things within the Trump comparison that just don't work. One of the main things is that there's this big tech mogul in the movie who basically runs the world, okay? He's basically the one who controls the president from behind the strings. And it's a metaphor for big tech is basically controlling the world. They know everything about your life. And sorry, YouTube, Google, I know you're watching, obviously, from all angles at all times. The guy in this movie who plays that role is a guy called Rylance. And he plays this character which is really the perfect blend of all the big tech heads that you've ever known, be it Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, even Elon Musk to a degree, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates. You take all those guys and you condense them into one person, and this is the guy you're going to get. Okay, somebody who is appearing very meek and harmless, but is also incredibly evil and self-centered at the same time. And in the movie, he is clearly the one who's pulling the puppet strings of the presidency. Okay, in the movie, it's a big tech fascist dictatorship. Now, the reason why that comparison doesn't entirely map onto reality, because we all know that there was a line drawn between the past administration and big tech, whether that came in terms of censorship or restricting various accounts and various people from various platforms. We know that there was clearly a line being drawn there. So perhaps, just perhaps, the critics didn't like the fact that big tech was being painted in such a negative light, and that there was this depiction of cronyism on that level, which almost makes it impossible to say that this movie is strictly a one-to-one comparison for Trump, okay? Because I really don't think it was. So in that respect, then, the movie wasn't anti-Trump enough, and I think that's why a lot of critics didn't like it. Now, that was just a theory of mine, because I've seen movies which were far more on the nose, okay, which were far more in your face in terms of their metaphor, that these critics tend to give glaring reviews. So clearly there's some inconsistency there. But there's a lot of themes in this movie that I really liked. One of them was obviously big tech pulling the puppet strings of government. The other one addresses the problem of politics getting in the way of intervening in a crisis. The inability for any administration to really plan long term, because they're always trying to appease public opinion in the short term. And this is one of the benefits, if there was ever any benefit of a dictatorship, would simply be the ability of not having to worry about winning the next election. So you could actually make those long-term investments, and it wouldn't come at the expense of losing your current voting base. Because let's face it, we people tend to be very fickle, and we care about what's right in front of us. We care about jobs right now, irrespective of what the end result is going to be. Now, obviously, when this movie is led by Leonardo DiCaprio, who happens to have admitted, I believe it was 420, is it kilotons or tons? I think it was tons of CO2 last year in his globe-trotting around, you know, taking flights here and there, and however many mansions he owns. About 420 tons, okay? Compare that to the average person, which is about 20 tons. And that's only the average North American, okay? The average North American, in some cases, can emit around 100 times the amount of CO2 as people in other countries. So clearly his carbon footprint is inconsistent with the message of the movie. Even though I think he did a pretty good job, okay? He's virtue signaling, we know, and you could say, well, if you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. I get it. Take a step back before you can take a step forward, but it's only excusable to a certain extent. Another theme in this movie was, of course, that everybody is preoccupied with trifling issues, celebrity gossip. One of the main stories in the movie that overshadows everything else is the breakup of this celebrity couple. And it's pretty hilarious because even the scientists themselves who are trying to get the word out are still concerned about this relationship in the midst of all this. So kind of funny and sad at the same time. The other theme is the criminalization of telling the truth, people being blacklisted, having to sign NDAs, all the legal hurdles involved in being a whistleblower, and just all of the barriers in terms of getting information out onto the mainstream media that you're going to face. And then even if you can get it out to the mainstream media, are people going to believe you? Are they just going to turn you into a meme when you try to be serious about something like Jennifer Lawrence's character did? And the last theme is writing anybody off who's talking about these harbingers of bad things to come as being crazy and writing them off as being a loon. Now, the real gem in this movie as a whole, if there's one takeaway and one thing that I really related to in this movie, is being a person who is trying to promote the importance of prepping for people for these global issues which are reaching a boiling point. Me trying to communicate to people the importance of trying to take responsibility for their own well-being should the grid go down, instead of being preoccupied by what Ariana Grande is going to wear to the next Grammy Award show, or what she isn't going to wear for that matter, is very frustrating. It's very, very frustrating. And that's why I could relate with these characters. There's definitely obvious parallels to any emergency or crisis where there's one camp who is anti-science and another camp who is pro-science. Now, there's definitely overtones of the pandemic. You can definitely see that in this movie. However, another thing that they may not have liked about this movie is that it takes a jab, and no pun intended with this next thing I'm going to say, it does take a jab at corporations seeking to make a profit off of disaster. So as much as the movie on the surface would seemingly criticize the Trump administration and its inability to act on the issue of global warming and climate change, you could equally say that it's saying the same thing about the Biden administration, who, I should add, hasn't really done much, if anything, different from what Trump has done with respect to this particular issue, or any government around the world for that matter. As much as it seems like that on the surface, you start to see that when you dig deep and you look deep into this movie, this is a scathing critique of the entire political spectrum. It's not just about your side is wrong, my side is right. It's about, look, we're all wrong in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of things that are depicted in this movie that the left are equally guilty of. There's so many Easter eggs in this movie. Like every minute, almost everything said, everything shown on screen is some kind of metaphor for something. Like there's this part in the movie, right in the opening scene, the astronomers get flued out to the White House in this giant, like, I don't know what it was, like a Boeing C-17, like a big military plane, and they were the only people on the plane. Perhaps that was a nod to government wasteful spending or something like that. But every single second of the movie has some implication like that, which is why it's so rewatchable. Everyone in the movie has relationship issues. They're all either cheaters or backstabbers or divorcees. Like there's no loyalty anymore. So they show that cultural deterioration component. And one of the funniest comparisons is in this big tech company that runs the world called Bash. I'm still not sure if that's some kind of acronym for something, like bashing us over the head with it or something. I don't know. But their whole motto in the movie is life without the stress of living. So I mean, that pretty much sums it up. And in this movie, this company Bash has all the information about you. They have predictive algorithms that know what you're going to do next, that know how you're going to die. And I would say that this definitely gives Idiocracy a run for its money. And in a lot of ways, Idiocracy was far more slapstick and cartoony. This oscillates in between being very plausible on the one hand and very relatable for me as purveyor of preparedness related information, and in between kind of goofy and excessive and exaggerated at times, because it's still a comedy. It's a dark comedy. I thought the movie was pretty funny. It wasn't funny in the same way that the movie with Seth Rogen and all the other actors, the movie where they play themselves, what's it called? this is how it ends or something like that. It wasn't that funny, but it was still funny. But I didn't go into it for funny. I go into these movies because I want to see, what sort of thoughts can be stimulated along the ends of what we talk about here. Another theme in the movie is that everybody's on some kind of psychopharmaceutical medication, and if you don't believe what the government is telling you, they put you on more medication. Xanax gets a lot of plugs in this movie, but I'm pretty sure they mention it enough in this movie for anxiety that somebody is probably going to go and want to get some Xanax after they watch this movie because it's talked about so much. So I almost wonder sometimes if that's how they get advertisements into these movies like that. Another theme of the movie is that the Hollywood superstars only really get involved when it becomes really fashionable and stylish to do so. And one of the biggest themes in the movie is that everybody thinks it's a hoax up until the last minute. Now, I've talked about this before. On the one hand, the government is going to seek to minimize panic as much as possible. If there was a situation like this that played out in real life, a few things are going to happen. The first thing that's going to happen is the government's going to claim to have a plan to deal with it. And that's perhaps why we've been primed with all these movies. Maybe inadvertently. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm just saying that you would want to minimize panic as much as possible. And it's surprising that in this movie, there was very, very little panic because everybody was so in doubt and in denial and preoccupied with arguing with one another that there wasn't a whole lot of riotous behavior until the last few days before the asteroid actually struck. So I found that kind of interesting, but we know government's job number one is going to be crowd control. So they can get bunkers ready to go, or they can build their own spaceships, whatever they got to do to keep everybody chill, to make sure that the society keeps flowing so that they can build whatever they have to build in order to either take care of the issue or take care of themselves. The other thing that this movie brought to light was the whole hoax factor and the whole denier factor. Now, I don't like calling people deniers because there's just so many connotations to that. I think it's historically disrespectful to draw parallels to that and other events that have happened in history. But I also just think that it doesn't get us anywhere in the conversation. If you want to convince somebody of your perspective, the last thing you want to do is insult them in any way, because you're only going to make the matters worse. And if you know that and you proceed to doing that, then you must have some kind of vested interest in creating the animosity and keeping the tension alive. So that's why I think it's very disingenuous to try to tackle an issue like this by calling people deniers. That said, this movie talks about that truism that there are going to be people who think anything is a hoax up until the last minute. Up until they die of that very thing themselves, they're going to think it's a hoax. So between the people who are fighting over whether or not it's going to happen and the people who believe it's not even happening at all, it doesn't leave a lot of room for a lot of people to be really worried about it and rioting in the streets. Because as long as you have the majority of the population keeping their cool, and as long as the media mouthpieces are telling the people what they want to hear, then yeah, you could probably BS your way right up to the hours before the asteroid actually hit. You could make up some excuse that, there's a plan to deflect it right when it gets, but it has to get this close, or whatever they're going to make up, okay? Anyways, it was a star-studded cast in the movie. It didn't feel like a Rat Race or a Mars Attacks where they just throw a bunch of big-name celebrities and it's just awkward, like kind of one of those all-star games where you think the team is going to perform amazingly well, but because they don't have everybody in the right proportions, it just doesn't work when everybody's trying to be the superstar. It didn't feel like that at all in this movie. It felt that the people who were chosen to play the roles, there was actually a reason for it. Jonah Hill was hilarious. He kind of added the major comedic element to the film, I thought, with his trifling criticisms of the protagonists and whatnot. There was Jennifer Lawrence, who was the disaffected, unhinged pot smoker, the young PhD student who was emotionally unstable because she was the most sane person of all throughout the whole movie. And of course, she was the one who was made memes out of. She was the one who was painted as being the most crazy, even though she was the most sane from the start to the finish of the movie. She never waned in her beliefs about what needed to be done. The main character, Leonardo DiCaprio, was somebody who waned in his beliefs over time. He was still chasing the clout, but I thought he did a really good job in the role of a nervous astronomer who's come to the conclusion that the world's going to end and nobody around him will listen. So he basically takes the approach of, well, if you can't beat him, join him. But that's all I'll say about that. Meryl Streep, I thought, was really good in the role. I really think they would have been hard-pressed to find a better person to play that role as a female president. Now, one thing I will say about this and the parallel between Idiocracy. In Idiocracy, the president is played by Terry Crews, who is it President Camacho or something like that. And of course, I think, 8 years later, Obama became president. So perhaps this is telegraphing that now this is this generation's Idiocracy, that maybe in the next 8 years, we're going to see a female president. Who knows? That could be what's happening. Mark Rylance, as I said, he's the guy who played the big tech guy. He did a really good job of playing the creepy but meek tech oligarch, overlord, whatever you want to call him. And Cate Blanchett, Tyler Perry, they played the ostentatious TV talk show hosts. And I think they did that very well, to a T. And of course, right up until the last minute, people are going to be distracted. Anyways, guys, I've rambled on long enough about this movie. I think it's one of the great ones that we've had of our generation. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. And yeah, stay warm out there. If you guys are wondering, the reason why I'm donning this Outdoor Survival Canada jacket, which is the warmest jacket in the world, I must add. The reason why I'm doing that is because it's minus 32 here. Now, tomorrow, I'm going to be going out and shooting a video in minus 50, okay? That's 50 with the wind chill. The actual temperature is going to be around minus 38. So stick around for that, because if you're where I'm from, half the year you're suspended in sub-zero temperatures, and you got to have a plan for how you're going to survive if the heat goes someday, right? Okay, guys, you take care. Stay warm. Thanks for watching. Go check out that movie, Canadian Prepper Out.